The moons of Helios Prime cast long shadows across Jerk's clinic as he cataloged his dwindling medical supplies. The frontier settlement of Hollow Point wasn't much. A collection of prefabricated structures, makeshift markets, and too many desperate souls. But it was home now. 3 years since he'd abandoned his prestigious position at the Terran Medical Academy to serve where he was truly needed. The perimeter alarm shattered the night's quiet. Not the usual chime of a visitor, but the harsh blare signaling a breach. Jerk's hand moved instinctively to the pulse pistol beneath the counter, a reluctant concession to frontier reality, before he heard the heavy impact against his clinic door. What slumped across his threshold wasn't human. 8 feet of muscle, sinew, and armored scales gleamed wetly in the clinic's harsh lighting. A Crithari warrior, female by the crimson crest running from crown to spine, her chest heaving with labored breaths. Arterial fluid the color of burnished copper pooled beneath her massive frame. Jerk had heard the stories. Everyone had. The Crithari were living weapons bred for conquest across a dozen systems. Their reputation for brutality was matched only by their code. Strength above all, victory or death, no mercy given or expected. Yet here one lay, dying on his floor. The Crithari's eyes, vertical pupils set in amber irises, focused on him with predatory intensity despite her wounds. One clawed hand scraped against the polished concrete, leaving deep gouges as she tried to rise. "Stay down," Jerk said firmly, medical training overriding his instinct for self-preservation. "You've lost too much blood." A sound like grinding metal emerged from her throat. Laughter, he realized with shock. "No orders, from prey," she managed, each word pushing more copper fluid from a deep gash across her torso. Some kind of energy weapon had carved through her natural armor. "Kill me, cleanly, honor, in death." Jerk approached cautiously, medical scanner already assessing the damage. "I'm not in the killing business," he replied, setting down his instrument tray. "I'm a doctor, I heal." The Crithari's expression shifted into something like contempt. "Weakness," she snarled, though the effort cost her. Her massive frame shuddered. "Crithari die in battle, not on tables." "Well, you're not on a table yet," Jerk observed calmly, preparing a sedative calibrated for xenobiological systems. "And this isn't a battle, it's my clinic. Different rules apply." Before she could protest, he administered the injection with practiced precision, finding the vulnerable spot between her armored plates. Her eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed dangerously. "I am Vhalla," she growled as the sedative began to take effect. "Remember, name will kill you when." "When you're better," Jerk finished for her as her massive body finally relaxed. "Looking forward to it. Now let's make sure you live that long." The next 6 hours tested everything Jerk knew about xenophysiology. Crithari anatomy was classified intel, but working on the frontier had exposed him to enough alien biologies to identify patterns. Their redundant systems gave them extraordinary resilience, but something had compromised her regenerative capabilities. A toxin, perhaps, delivered with the energy blast. Jerk worked methodically, removing fragments of her own armor embedded in the wound, synthesizing a neutralizing agent for the toxin, and finally sealing the worst of the damage with a protein weave that would allow her natural healing to complete the process. Dawn broke over the settlement as he finished, washing the clinic in pale golden light. Jerk slumped into a chair beside the reinforced medical table where Vhalla lay unconscious, her breathing now steady and strong. He'd done all he could. The rest was up to her remarkable biology, and whatever drove a Crithari berserker to fight for survival when her own code demanded an honorable death. He studied her features, fierce even in repose. The stories never mentioned that Crithari had expressions beyond rage, but he'd seen confusion in those alien eyes, and perhaps something else when he refused to grant her warrior's death. "What brought you here, Vhalla?" he wondered aloud, knowing the answer would come all too soon. Whatever battle had nearly claimed her life might yet reach his doorstep. The frontier existed in the shadow of conflicts too vast for people like him to understand. But understanding wasn't required for compassion. That was the oath he'd taken, the principle that had carried him to this remote outpost. Heal what is broken, mend what is torn, offer mercy without condition or expectation. Even to those who had never known it. The first thing Vhalla registered was the absence of pain, a sensation so foreign it jarred her fully into consciousness. Her amber eyes snapped open, pupils contracting to thin slits in the clinic's soft light. Memory returned in fragments. The ambush, her ship spiraling toward the settlement, dragging herself to what looked like a medical facility, and then, the human. She flexed her clawed hands experimentally, surprised at their strength. By all rights, she should be dead. The poison-tipped energy blast had been designed specifically for Crethari physiology, a dishonorable weapon used by cowards. Yet here she was, alive, dishonored. "You're awake," the human's voice came from across the room, calm and unsurprised. "Earlier than expected, your species' resilience is remarkable." Vhalla pushed herself upright, ignoring the protest from her healing tissues. The movement was deliberate, intended to intimidate. She towered over the human even seated, her muscled frame dwarfing his softer one. "You denied me warrior's death," she accused, her voice a rumbling bass that vibrated the instruments on a nearby tray. Jerk approached without visible fear, checking a monitor beside her bed. "I offered you life. You didn't refuse it very effectively." The casual dismissal of her code stoked something primal in Vhalla's chest. She lunged forward, one massive hand closing around the human's throat faster than any non-Crethari could track. Yet even as her claws pressed against his fragile skin, she found herself curiously unable to apply the killing pressure. "I could crush your windpipe before your next heartbeat," she growled. Jerk didn't struggle or plead. He simply met her gaze steadily, pulse elevated but controlled beneath her grip. "You could," he agreed, "but you won't." "You know nothing of Crethari," she snarled. "I know you've had multiple opportunities to kill me since you regained consciousness 10 minutes ago. Your breathing pattern changed." His voice remained irritatingly calm. "Yet here we are, having a conversation." Vhalla released him with a disgusted sound, shoving him away just hard enough to make him stumble. The human straightened his clothing with infuriating composure. "The poison that nearly killed you is still present in trace amounts," he explained, returning to his monitors. "I've neutralized its immediate effects, but you'll need another treatment cycle before you're combat ready." "Why help enemy?" Vhalla demanded, her translator implant struggling with the concept. "What payment demanded?" Something crossed Jerk's face then, not fear but a more complex emotion her translator couldn't identify. "Not everyone views the universe as a battlefield divided into enemies and allies," he said quietly. "You needed help. I could provide it. That's sufficient." The concept was so alien that Vhalla's brain rejected it outright. In her experience, nothing came without cost. Survival was earned through strength, loyalty purchased with blood, respect taken by force. This human offered something with no apparent gain, no leverage requested, no dominance established. It was deeply unsettling. "Weak thinking," she muttered, but without her earlier conviction. Jerk shrugged, unperturbed. "Yet effective, you're alive to judge me, after all." Over the next 3 days, Vhalla observed the human with growing confusion. Jerk treated other patients, miners with radiation burns, a smuggler with bullet wounds, colonists with bacterial infections, all with the same quiet competence he'd shown her. He slept little, ate sporadically, and worked with single-minded focus that, in a Crethari, might have been respected as warrior's discipline. But he expected nothing in return. Many patients paid him in local currency or trade goods. Others promised payment later. Some simply left with muttered thanks. Jerk noted payments in a haphazard log but never demanded them, never threatened consequences for failure. On the 4th night, as Jerk changed the protein weave on her nearly healed wound, Vhalla finally asked the question that had been troubling her. "How do you survive, human, without taking?" The concept was difficult to convey. Jerk's hands remained steady on her wound. "I take what I need, shelter, food, enough credits to restock supplies, but I don't need to take everything." "Vulnerability," she observed, "others will exploit." "Sometimes," he acknowledged, "but less often than you might think. Turns out when you help people without demanding everything in return, many choose to help you back." Vhalla contemplated this strange assertion. It contradicted everything she'd been taught since emerging from the breeding pits. The galaxy was merciless. Only the strongest survived. Compassion was the indulgence of the weak, and the weak perished. Yet this human, fragile as he appeared, had survived on this lawless frontier for years, respected even by those who could easily destroy him. "You could be stronger," she said finally, oddly compelled to offer the observation. "Could take more, command respect." Jerk finished sealing her wound before answering. There are different kinds of strength, Vhalla. Her name sounded strange in his mouth, softer. The Crithari aren't the only ones who have figured that out. That night, unable to sleep, Vhalla prowled the small clinic. Her physiology was nearly restored, the poison purged from her system. She could leave, return to her battle group, explain her survival as a testament to Crithari superiority. None would know of the humans' intervention. But the debt would remain, unpaid, unacknowledged. The concept chafed against her sense of order. She found Jerk asleep at his desk, vulnerable and unguarded. She studied his features, trying to discern what power allowed him to navigate the frontier without the constant threat of violence. What strength he possessed that she couldn't identify. As dawn approached, Vhalla made a decision that would have been unthinkable just days before. She would remain until the debt was settled, until she understood this human's peculiar power, this compassion that seemed impossibly to command its own kind of respect. She didn't realize it then, but in choosing to understand rather than dominate, she had already begun to change. Vhalla was performing strength exercises, her fifth set of one-handed inversions against the clinic's reinforced back wall, when the first explosion rocked the settlement. Her body reacted before her mind could process, dropping into a defensive crouch, muscles tensed and senses heightened. The acrid scent of plasma weapons and burning synthetics filled the air. Raiders. Jerk burst through the door from the front of the clinic, face grim. "Black Sun mercenaries," he said without preamble. "At least 15. They're hitting the entire North Quadrant." Black Sun, the name triggered recognition in Vhalla, a mid-tier mercenary outfit known for brutality rather than skill. They specialized in quick, devastating strikes against civilian targets, the kind of tactics Crithari warriors considered beneath contempt. "You have weapons?" she demanded, already calculating combat scenarios. "Medical equipment and a basic pulse pistol," Jerk replied, moving with surprising efficiency to secure the clinic's main entrance. "Nothing that would make a difference against their armor." A second explosion closer now. Screams followed, colonists caught in the open. "Evacuation route," Vhalla pressed. "There's a service tunnel beneath the clinic," Jerk confirmed, "but I'm not leaving." Vhalla stared at him, momentarily unable to process his statement. "Tactically unsound, you cannot fight, cannot defend." Jerk moved to a cabinet, extracting emergency medical kits and placing them at strategic points around the clinic. His movements were precise, practiced. "I have 3 patients who can't be moved," he explained. "And once the fighting starts, there will be more wounded." The human's decision defied all logic. Without weapons or combat training, he stood no chance against armed mercenaries. Yet he prepared for battle in his own way, not with weapons, but with bandages, regeneration packs, and surgical tools. "Suicide," Vhalla growled, the translator implant rendering her frustration perfectly. "Probably," Jerk agreed without looking up. "But necessary." He finally paused, meeting her gaze directly. "You should go. The tunnel entrance is behind the storage unit. You're healed enough to make it to the spaceport on the south side." Something unfamiliar twisted in Vhalla's chest, an emotion her translator couldn't define. This small, fragile human accepting death not in glorious battle but in defense of the defenseless. It was not the Crithari way. It made no sense. Yet it commanded respect. Before she could respond, the clinic's front viewport shattered under concentrated fire. Black Sun raiders poured through the breach, their faceplates reflecting the emergency lights in demonic patterns. "Everyone out, this is a cleansing operation," their leader shouted, weapon trained on Jerk. "Any resistance and we burn this place with everyone inside." Vhalla remained hidden in the shadowed treatment room, assessing. 6 raiders in the first wave, heavily armed but poorly positioned. Overconfident. Their attention focused on Jerk, who stood with empty hands raised, his body deliberately placed between the intruders and the door leading to his immobile patients. "I'm a doctor," Jerk said calmly. "These are civilians. There's nothing of value here except medical supplies, which I'm happy to share if your people need treatment." The lead raider laughed, the sound distorted through his helmet's speaker. "Noble, but we're not here for supplies, Doc. We're sending a message. This settlement belongs to Black Sun now." He gestured to his men. "Burn it, starting with the hero here." Something ancient and primal stirred in Vhalla's blood. The battle rage that made Crithari berserkers legendary across the stars, a state where pain vanished, strength doubled, and mercy ceased to exist. But this time, it wasn't triggered by threat to herself. It was for him, for Jerk. The first raider died before he even registered her presence, her claws tearing through his armor like paper, finding the vulnerable throat beneath. The second managed half a scream before she silenced him with a precision strike to his brainstem. Time slowed in the crimson haze of battle fury. Vhalla moved between the raiders like a force of nature, not mindless in her rage, but coldly, perfectly efficient. Each movement calculated for maximum damage, each kill clean and immediate. The leader turned his weapon toward her, but Vhalla was already inside his guard. She lifted him by the throat, armored boots dangling above the floor. "Message," she snarled, her translator struggling with the depth of her rage. "Send one to Blacksun, settlement protected by Crithari." She didn't kill him, a decision that would have shocked her battle brothers. Instead, she crushed his weapon hand and threw him bodily through the shattered viewport. When she turned back to the clinic interior, blood dripping from her claws, 4 dead raiders lay scattered across the once pristine floor. The 5th moaned softly, critically wounded but alive. The battle rage receded slowly, leaving her trembling with its aftermath. Jerk hadn't moved from his protective stance before the patient room. He surveyed the carnage with a healer's eye rather than a warrior's, assessing damage, not victory. Vhalla approached him, suddenly uncertain. Humans feared Crithari berserkers, all species did. She had revealed the fullness of her nature, the cold brutality that defined her kind. She expected revulsion, terror, perhaps even hatred for bringing such violence into his healing space. Instead, Jerk reached for a clean bandage and gently took her hand. He began wiping the blood from her claws with careful, methodical movements. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. The question struck Vhalla like a physical blow. No one had ever asked about her welfare after battle. Crithari warriors were expected to triumph or die. There was no middle ground, no concern for their state beyond victory. "You are not afraid," she stated, searching his face for signs of deception. "I'm terrified," Jerk corrected, continuing to clean her hands. "But not of you." He nodded toward the fallen raiders. "There will be more. The leader escaped. They'll regroup, come back stronger." Vhalla felt a strange protectiveness surge through her chest. "Then we prepare." She didn't recognize the significance of that simple word. "We," until much later. Didn't understand that in that moment, standing amidst blood and broken glass, something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of strength, of purpose, of worth. For the first time in her existence, a Crithari berserker had found something worth protecting rather than conquering, and that revelation would change everything. Night fell over the frontier settlement, but rest eluded its inhabitants. Word of the Blacksun raid and its bloody conclusion had spread rapidly. Some fled to other outposts. Others barricaded themselves in their homes. A brave few gathered at the clinic, offering what weapons and supplies they could spare. Jerk worked tirelessly, treating the wounded from the initial attack while converting his clinic into something resembling a defensible position. He accepted the community's offerings with quiet gratitude, his hands steady despite exhaustion etched across his features. Vhalla observed it all with growing fascination. These humans possessed no natural armor, no significant strength, yet they organized with surprising efficiency, each contributing according to their abilities, not from fear or coercion, but voluntarily. It contradicted everything she'd been taught about lesser species. "You should rest," she told Jerk as midnight approached, finding herself concerned by the dark circles beneath his eyes. "Combat ineffective without recovery." Jerk smiled faintly, setting down a crate of medical supplies. "Worried about me?" The question provoked an unfamiliar heat beneath Vhalla's scales. "Tactical assessment only," she insisted. "You are necessary." "High praise from a Crithari warrior," he replied, but there was no mockery in his tone. He gestured toward the main treatment room they'd converted into a command center of sorts. "You're right, though. A few hours' sleep would help us both." They settled in the reinforced room, Vhalla positioned strategically near the entry point, Jerk on a makeshift pallet nearby. But rest proved elusive for both. "Your wounds," Jerk said into the darkness after several minutes of silence. "The ones that brought you here, they weren't from Blacksun." It wasn't a question, but Vhalla answered anyway. Internal conflict, challenge from rival pack leader. The words felt strange on her tongue. Crithari rarely discussed their hierarchical disputes with outsiders. Assassination attempt, dishonorable. Is that why you didn't return to your people? Because surviving would be dishonorable. Vhalla's claws scraped lightly against the floor as she considered the question. The truth was more complex than honor. Surviving with help, unprecedented, no protocol. She paused, struggling with concepts her translator implant wasn't designed to convey. Must understand first, before returning. Understand what? Why? She turned toward him in the darkness, her amber eyes reflecting what little light filtered through the blinds. Why you helped? Why I? She couldn't complete the thought. Jerk was silent for a long moment. Does everything need a tactical reason, Vhalla? The question disturbed her more than she wanted to admit. Universe is battlefield, she recited, the mantra ingrained since her earliest memories. All actions for advantage, survival, dominance. Is that what you felt today, dominance, when you protected this place? Vhalla's memory flashed to the moment she'd launched herself at the raiders, not for glory or conquest, but because they threatened someone she valued. The realization was disorienting. No, she admitted finally, felt purpose. Jerk moved closer in the darkness, close enough that she could feel his body heat radiating against her scales. Humans ran cooler than Crithari, yet his proximity triggered a warming response in her blood. Maybe that's your answer, he suggested quietly. Something shifted between them in that moment, an invisible barrier dissolving. Vhalla reached out tentatively, one clawed finger tracing the contour of his jaw with surprising gentleness. Jerk remained perfectly still, his pulse elevated but eyes steady. Fragile, she murmured, more to herself than to him, yet strong in ways Crithari cannot comprehend. Her touch became more exploratory, mapping the unfamiliar terrain of human skin, so different from her armored hide. Jerk's breath caught as her palm flattened against his chest, feeling the rhythmic beat beneath. Is this acceptable? She questioned, suddenly uncertain. Crithari didn't ask permission, they took, but this was different, this required consent. In answer, Jerk's hand covered hers, warm and steady. Yes. What followed was a revelation to Vhalla, not conquest but connection. Their bodies couldn't have been more different, yet they found a language beyond words, beyond species. Where she expected to dominate, she discovered the pleasure of mutual surrender. Where she anticipated violence, she found tenderness she never knew herself capable of giving or receiving. Afterward, as Jerk slept curled against her larger frame, Vhalla experienced an emotion her translator had no word for, a fierce protectiveness mingled with vulnerability that should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like discovering a new dimension of strength. She understood now what had changed within her. Crithari existed to conquer, to dominate, to survive at all costs. But Jerk had shown her something far more powerful than mere survival, a reason to live. Connection, purpose beyond the battlefield. As dawn approached, bringing with it the certainty of renewed conflict, Vhalla made a decision that would have been unthinkable mere days ago. She would not merely fight for this place, for this human. She would stand with him, beside him, as an equal, not a protector or guardian. The distinction was significant. In Crithari culture, there were only leaders and followers, predators and prey. The concept of partnership, of fighting alongside rather than for or against, was revolutionary. The settlement's warning system pierced the early morning quiet, proximity alerts signaling the approach of multiple vessels. Black Sun reinforcements, most likely. Beside her, Jerk stirred, immediately alert despite his exhaustion. They're coming, he said simply, reaching for his clothes. Vhalla rose to her full height, rolling her powerful shoulders as her body prepared for battle. But unlike every conflict before, she felt no solitary bloodlust, no isolated fury. Instead, a clarity of purpose filled her. We face them together, she stated, the words carrying the weight of a vow. Jerk looked up at her, understanding the significance that she might not yet fully grasp herself. Together, he agreed. As they prepared for the coming storm, Vhalla realized that in finding something worth protecting, she had discovered something worth living for. The irony was not lost on her, that a species who had never known mercy had found its greatest strength in the moment it received it. And if they survived what was coming, the universe itself might never be the same. The Black Sun mercenaries never came. Instead, a massive Chthari warship descended through Helios Prime's atmosphere, its silhouette blotting out the rising sun. The Void Talon, flagship of warlord Krazak, commander of the Crimson Vanguard and Vhalla's former battle master. Vhalla stood at the edge of the settlement, her posture rigid as the ship's engines stirred dust around her feet. Jerk remained a few paces behind, respecting her need to face this moment alone, yet close enough to signal his support. "They tracked my biosignature," she explained without turning. "Warlord would not abandon elite berserker, asset too valuable." "And now," Jerk asked quietly, "now comes judgment." The warship's landing ramp descended with theatrical slowness, disgorging a contingent of Chthari warriors in full battle regalia. They moved in perfect formation, every step a demonstration of lethal efficiency. At their center walked Warlord Krazak, nearly 9 feet of scarred muscle and ceremonial armor, his crest a deeper red than Vhalla's, marked with the gold patterns of countless victories. The settlement had emptied at the warship's approach, humans retreating behind barricaded doors. Only Jerk remained in the open, watching as Vhalla stepped forward to meet her kind. Krazak halted 10 paces from Vhalla, his massive head tilting as he assessed her condition. "Survivor," he rumbled, the translator rendering his tone somewhere between approval and suspicion. "Reports of your demise were premature." Vhalla dropped to one knee in the traditional salute of a warrior to her warlord. But she rose again without permission, a subtle defiance that did not go unnoticed. "Assassination failed," she stated flatly. "Treachery of Subcommander Drax exposed." Krazak's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Drax has been disciplined. His challenge was unauthorized." The warlord's gaze shifted to Jerk, narrowing dangerously. "You sought aid from prey species, dishonor." "I survived," Vhalla countered, "to fight again for the Vanguard." "Perhaps," Krazak moved closer, towering over her. Despite their size difference, Vhalla did not retreat. "Or perhaps weakness has infected you, contact with lesser beings, contaminating." The warriors behind Krazak shifted, hands moving to weapons. The message was clear. Their warlord expected resistance and had come prepared to eliminate a compromised asset. "The human," Krazak continued. "Healer, yes, curious that you permit its continued existence after dependency. Chthari erase such vulnerabilities." Something cold settled in Vhalla's core, not fear but certainty. The moment of reckoning had arrived sooner than anticipated, forcing a choice she had only begun to understand. "He is not vulnerability," she said, her voice carrying across the silent settlement. "He is strength I did not possess." Murmurs rippled through the warrior contingent, shock, confusion, outrage. Krazak's expression hardened. "Blasphemy against the code," he snarled. "Weakness justifying weakness." He drew his ceremonial blade, a wicked length of serrated metal designed specifically for execution of disgraced warriors. "You will die as example. The human will follow." Vhalla moved faster than even Chthari eyes could track, placing herself directly between Jerk and the warlord. Her stance was not defensive but challenging, legs braced, arms loose at her sides, chin lifted. "I stand with him," she declared, each word deliberate and clear. "Not as protector, as equal." The concept was so alien that several warriors physically recoiled. Equality was not a Chthari value. There was dominance or submission, strength or weakness, nothing between. "Madness," Krazak spat, "infection of mind." "Truth," Vhalla countered, "one you fear." The warlord lunged with frightening speed, blade arcing toward Vhalla's throat. She deflected with one armored forearm, accepting the cut rather than retreating. Blood welled between her scales, but she did not counterattack. "I will not fight you, warlord," she stated, voice steady despite the pain. "Not for dominance, not for hierarchy." Krazak struck again, a powerful diagonal slash that would have disemboweled a lesser opponent. Vhalla twisted, taking a shallower wound across her side rather than engaging. "Fight," Krazak roared, genuine confusion bleeding into his rage. "Die with honor." "There is honor beyond battle," Vhalla replied, the words strange on her tongue yet ringing with conviction. "This human showed me. He healed enemy without expectation, offered mercy without weakness." She lowered her guard completely, a gesture so contrary to Chthari instinct that Krazak actually hesitated mid-strike. Kill me if you must, Vhalla continued, but understand why. Not because I am weak, but because I have found strength you cannot comprehend. Strength in connection, in mutual protection, in mercy. The last word hung in the air like a challenge. Behind her, Jerk stepped forward, unarmed and unarmored, to stand at her side. Not hiding behind her superior strength, but joining it with his own different kind. Your warrior was dying when she found me, he said, addressing Krazak directly. I didn't save her because I wanted anything from her. I saved her because I could. Krazak stared at the human with naked incomprehension. Purpose, gain. None, Jerk confirmed, except that the universe has one more extraordinary being in it than it would have otherwise. Something unprecedented happened then. A younger Krithari warrior stepped from the formation, breaking protocol so severely that several others reached for their weapons. Warlord, the young male said, his voice barely translating through obvious fear. I would hear more of this, mercy. For a heartbeat, violence hung in the balance. Krazak could order execution of both dissidents, could reassert the absolute hierarchy that had defined Krithari society for millennia. Instead, he lowered his blade incrementally. Explain, he demanded, his attention shifting between Vhalla and the young warrior who had spoken. This concept, its tactical advantage. Vhalla felt something extraordinary then, hope, not for personal survival but for evolution, for change within a species that had known only conquest and dominance since its creation. It builds rather than destroys, she began carefully, creates loyalty beyond fear, allegiance beyond dominance. She gestured toward the settlement around them. These humans follow no warlord, yet they stand together, defend together, survive together. Weakness in isolation, Jerk added quietly, strength in connection. Krazak's massive frame seemed to settle, his battle readiness receding not into submission but into contemplation. Unproven concept, he said finally, requires observation. It wasn't acceptance, but neither was it rejection. For a species as rigidly dogmatic as the Krithari, even consideration of an alien concept represented seismic change. I remain here, Vhalla stated, not asking permission, to understand further, to learn. The warlord studied her for a long moment, centuries of biological conditioning warring with newfound curiosity. You were finest berserker of Crimson Vanguard, he said finally. Your absence, significant loss. Vhalla recognized the statement for what it was, not just acknowledgement of her value, but the closest thing to respect a warlord could offer a subordinate. I serve differently now, she replied, perhaps more valuably. The young warrior who had first spoken stepped forward again, joined now by two others. We would learn also, warlord, he said, mandibles trembling with the audacity of the request, of this alternative. Something shifted in Krazak's posture, a minute relaxation that only another Krithari would recognize. Not surrender, but adaptation. The quality that had made their species survivors across countless worlds and conflicts. Liaison, he pronounced finally. Cultural exchange, military observation. He fixed Vhalla with a penetrating stare. You will report findings, tactical applications of mercy. It was a face-saving measure, a way to frame radical change within acceptable parameters. But it was also genuine. The seed of transformation planted in fertile ground. Accepted, Vhalla agreed. As the Krithari contingent returned to their ship, minus the 3 volunteers who would remain as observers, Jerk moved closer to Vhalla, carefully examining the wounds she had received. That could have gone very differently, he observed, applying a regeneration pack to her lacerated forearm. Vhalla watched the massive warship ascend, carrying with it the first whispers of a revolution that might eventually transform her entire species. Has gone differently, she corrected. Everything changed. Because of you, Jerk said. You chose to stand rather than kneel, to question rather than accept. Vhalla turned to him, her powerful hand engulfing his with surprising gentleness. Because of you, she countered, who showed enemy compassion, who gave weakness strength. Her translator struggled with the emotion behind her next words. Who offered love to creature designed only for war. The dawn light caught in her amber eyes, turning them to molten gold as she gazed at the settlement. No longer just a refuge or tactical position, but something she had never possessed before. A home. What happens now? Jerk asked, his fingers interlacing with her clawed ones in a symbolic joining of their radically different natures. Vhalla looked toward the three young warriors who waited awkwardly at the settlement's edge, caught between two worlds. The brutal certainty they had always known and the transformative possibility they glimpsed through her defiance. Now, she said with newfound certainty, we build. In that moment, standing beside the human who had changed everything by offering simple kindness to a creature designed never to need, Vhalla understood the ultimate paradox, that the greatest revolution often begins with the smallest mercy. And throughout the stars, the Crithari would never be the same again.